Hello, this is the Federal Government in Action, Section C, U.S. Foreign Policy Lecture. Our prioritized standard is Government Civics Standard 24, and objectively, we're going to evaluate how foreign policy is split among different governmental structures. While conducting foreign policy, and by foreign policy, that's a government strategy for dealing with other nations, is generally at the discretion of the president and his subordinates in the executive branch. Effective foreign policy requires the participation of the president, departments and agencies of the executive branch, Congress, and even the public. Creation of effective foreign policy requires several things like the defining of important national interests, developing policies that promote those interests, and providing for a course of action capable of furthering those policies. Since the president cannot spend money not appropriated or paid for by Congress, because Congress has what's called power of the purse, cooperation between the president and Congress in foreign affairs is important. The president may not enact treaties or appoint government officials that are the ones that carry out the foreign policy without Senate approval. So that's another way that they are related. Also, the War Powers Act that was passed after Nixon limits the president's ability to operate military forces abroad without congressional approval. While the president does still have latitude in cases of national emergencies, generally speaking, you have a very short amount of time before you have to get Congress on board. Support from the public is important since many of the policies may directly affect the general public. The president has tremendous power over foreign affairs through powers granted through the Constitution. As Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, the President can direct military without authorization by Congress. Also, the nature of modern warfare has changed in the past several decades with the rise in covert operations or secret missions deployed by the President. For instance, you might be familiar with the covert Navy SEAL operation that assassinated Osama bin Laden. While Congress has the power to declare war, it's usually in response to a presidential request. So if you take a quick look at this graphic, you're going to notice that we've only had 5 declared wars. War of 1812, Mexican War, Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II. All of the other conflicts we've had are just that, conflicts, not officially wars. As the nation's chief diplomat, the president negotiates treaties, makes executive agreements, and exercises the power of recognition. The increasing use of executive agreements over treaties actually avoids the need for Senate approval. You could also make the argument this is not ideal overall, but it does not bother bringing Congress into it. Also, the power of recognition guides foreign policy in ways that are difficult for opponents in Congress to alter. So if you all of a sudden decide, hey, we're going to have relations with a communist country, well, you can't really undo that at the congressional level after the president has done that. As the chief executive and administrator of the nation, the president not only helps formulate foreign policy, but also supervises its implementation and attempts to obtain the resources to support it. Foreign policy is split among different governmental structures. For instance, the Department of State serves many functions directly related to our nation's foreign policy. The Department of State negotiates on behalf of the U.S. with foreign governments and international organizations, working to defend U.S. positions around the world in this capacity. Also, the Department of State reports on and analyzes conditions in foreign nations and institutions, for instance, the United Nations. Also, Department of State represents U.S. citizens and policies to the world. So this would be the group that actually goes around and attempts to protect U.S. citizens abroad from discriminatory or inhuman treatments. And also, the Department of State advances U.S. trade and investments. U.S. military power proves to be an instrument of diplomacy as a means of achieving certain foreign policy goals. The Department of Defense, which does operations out of the Pentagon building, coordinates and supervises all the government agencies dealing with national security. The Joint Chiefs of Staff serves as a strategy board of senior officers of the branches of the armed forces. So they include top officials from the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force. The chairperson of this is the president's primary military advisor. Also, the Department of Homeland Security, which began functioning in the early 2003 in reaction to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, has become very powerful in matters relating to trade, borders, immigration, and security, which therefore does make it a part of foreign policy. The intelligence community, aka spies, collects information, assesses its accuracy and reliability, and disseminates the information to decision makers. The intelligence community includes 17 organizations, including some of those you might have heard of: Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, the National Security Agency, or NSA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, or DIA, among many others, including you'll find the FBI in there also. The intelligence community is headed by the Director of National Intelligence, or the DNI, which reports directly to the president. So you have these many different intelligence agencies. They all report to this person, and this person reports what they find to the president. Bringing together many of the government departments and agencies involved in foreign policy is the National Security Council, or the NSC, which advises the president in all domestic, foreign, and military matters that relate to the nation's security. The NSC is headed by the President's National Security Advisor. Officially, that name is the President's Assistant for National Security Affairs, though we just call it the National Security Advisor for short, which directs a small group of foreign and military policy experts. The NSC is the principal forum for considering security and foreign policy matters. The NSC acts as the principal arm for coordinating these policies among the various government agencies. In addition to the President's National Security Advisor, and the NSC staff members, the NSC meetings are regularly attended by other top officials like the Vice President, the Secretaries of State and Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and also the Director of National Intelligence. All right, this concludes Federal Government in Action, Section C, Foreign Policy. Our prioritized standard again was Government Civics 24, and objectively now you can evaluate how foreign policy is split among different governmental structures.